Good afternoon, eighth graders. Today we're going to work on poetry annotation, which means we're going to be able to figure out what a poem means by analyzing how it's put together and what kind of figurative language is being used. We're going to start by marking the figurative language. We're just going to notice where it is and underline it and label it. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to take the next step and say, what does it mean? What does the use of the figurative language mean? And then at the end of that, we'll be able to determine the theme and the tone of the poem. So we're going to start with a poem that some of you have already seen, but some of you haven't, and you've answered some questions, but now I'm going to show you how to annotate this poem. All right, so we're going to start, and the first thing you should do is just read it all the way through. Okay, so the title is If You Were Coming in the Fall. If you were coming in the fall, I'd brush the summer by with half a smile and half a spurn, as housewives do a fly. If I could see you in a year, I'd wind the month in balls and put them each in separate drawers until their time befalls. If only centuries delayed, I'd count them on my hand, subtracting till my fingers dropped into Van Diemen's land. If certain, when this life was out, that yours and mine should be, I'd toss it yonder like a rind and taste eternity. But now, all ignorant of the length of time's uncertain wing, it goads me like the goblin bee that will not state its sting. Okay. So now we're going to start looking at the poem closely and figuring out what type of figurative language did the poet use and how does that affect what the poem is about. So we're going to start, when I first read it through, I noticed right away that there were 3 similes. Okay, and if you remember, a simile is a comparison using the words like or as. Right, and I'm just going to go up here and mark down where the similes are. Okay, which starts one right in the first stanza. It says, I brush the summer by with half a smile and half a spurn, as housewives do a fly. Right, so we have the word as there, so we can see that that is a simile. Right, when we go down to the 4th stanza, we see another simile that says, if certain when this life was out, that yours and mine should be, I'd toss it yonder like a rind and taste eternity. So here is another simile. Right, we can mark these down too, and labeling them. Go back up here and label this one too, as both similes. Right, and then I see the last simile in the last stanza. It said, but now, all ignorant of the length of time's uncertain wing, it goads me like the goblin bee that will not state its sting. So here we have another example of a simile. Right. The next thing that there is a lot of in this poem is personification. Personification is when we give human characteristics to things or ideas. So some personification that we have in this poem is right away in the first stanza. It starts, if you were coming in the fall, I'd brush the summer by. Okay, brushing summer by, being able to do that, that is not something that could literally be done. So we call that personification, to be able to brush summer away. Right. Another place we see a lot of personification is in the 2nd stanza. It says, if I could see you in a year, I'd wind the month in balls and put them each in separate drawers. Right. Being able to wind the month up into balls and put them in drawers, that is not something we can literally do either with months. So that again is another example of personification. Right. We have personification again in the third stanza. It said, if only centuries delay, I'd count them on my hand, subtract it until my fingers dropped into Van Diemen's land. Okay, so having your fingers drop into a place is a type of personification or even a little bit of hyperbole. It's an exaggeration. It's just not something that can literally be done. All right, and then the last one in the fourth stanza, we're talking about tasting eternity. Okay, again, that's not something that we can taste. It's using a human quality for something that can't be done. All right, and here we see a final personification when we talk about time's uncertain wing. Time doesn't have wings, so that's another example of personification. Some other things that are going on in here is hyperbole. Hyperbole is an exaggeration of ideas for effect. And we have some hyperbole right up here when we say, if only centuries delayed. So a century is 100 years. So several of them would be 200 years or more. So we're saying if the person wasn't coming in that amount of time, so that is not even possible for somebody to wait that long to come. So we can say that that's an exaggeration. All right. And then the final thing we're going to look at, actually two final things, is one is an allusion, which is a reference to a historical or literary work, cultural work or idea. And one place we see that is right here. This is an allusion, Van Diemen's Land. You probably didn't know what that was, and I didn't either until I looked it up and found out what it meant. So that is an allusion. All right. So the first thing we did was we just marked the personification, the similes, the hyperbole, the allusion. The other thing that we see a lot of is repetition. Right? We see repetition of the word if at the beginning of almost all the stanzas except the last one. So that repetition is meant to be important, and also when it changes, it gives us some ideas that are important. Okay, the second thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out what does all of this mean and how does it work together. So we can go stanza by stanza. So the first one is talking about, hey, if the person the speaker is waiting for is coming in the fall, they just brush the summer by like a housewife does a fly. So a fly, we have the personification and the simile working together here. Brushing away a fly is something that's not very serious. It's kind of a nuisance, but it's really not a big deal. We see half a smile and half a spurn. So you're kind of annoyed, but it's not that serious. So this stanza really means that if you are coming soon in the summer, it's not a big deal. It's going to go fast. It's just kind of annoying. Right? And this is where we get that information. Right? Well, the next one says, but if you're coming in a year, okay, now we have to separate the months out, wind them up, and then put them in all these drawers. So it's a little bit bigger of a deal than this one, because now we have to separate this out. So this time the person is saying, if you come in a year, okay, she's going to have to break it up into months to make it more manageable. And then she'll put them away one at a time. It will be harder, but it will be manageable.